3 hard knocks struck Clara Whitmore's cabin door, sharp and sudden, like gunshots in the night. She froze where she stood, one hand wrapped around a wooden spoon, the other steadying the small iron pot hanging over her fire. Outside, the wind screamed across the Wyoming ridge, hurling snow against the walls in thick white waves. The storm had come early that winter, mean and wild. No one climbed this mountain once the snow began to fall. No one with sense, anyway. Her cabin was small, built by her father's hands, and held together now by her stubborn will. Since his death 2 winters ago, Clara had lived alone, fighting cold, hunger, and loneliness with the same quiet grit that had kept her father alive for 30 years on that land. The knock came again. Not loud this time. Weak. Clara reached for the rifle above the mantel, and her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The last strangers who had knocked at her door had laughed at her patched dress and the thinness of her stew before riding off into the night. But this knock did not sound proud. It sounded desperate. She stepped toward the window, wiping frost from the glass with her sleeve. Through the swirling snow, she saw a tall cowboy standing against the storm. His coat was heavy, but stiff with ice. One arm held a small boy against his chest. The child's head hung low, limp with exhaustion. Behind them, 2 horses stood bowed against the wind, ribs showing, legs trembling. The boy's lips were blue. Clara swallowed hard. Her father's voice rose in her memory, firm and steady. "Hospitality ain't optional in a storm." She set the rifle down and opened the door. The wind burst inside, and carrying snow across her floor. The cold cut through her thin shawl like a blade. The cowboy stepped forward, boots heavy with ice. Up close, she saw the lines on his face, deep and worn, and eyes dark with something that went beyond fatigue. "Ma'am," he said. Just that one word, but it carried miles of fear and a father's helplessness. Clara stepped aside. They entered, bringing the storm with them. She shut the door fast, and the roar outside softened to a distant howl against the logs. "By the fire," she said quickly. The cowboy knelt near the hearth and gently lowered the boy to the rug. Clara grabbed her only spare quilt, the one her mother had stitched before she passed, and wrapped it tightly around the child. He could not have been more than 8. His clothes were fine, though worn from travel, and his boots were expensive leather, not the kind a drifter's child usually wore. His hands, though frozen, were soft. "How long you been riding?" Clara asked, pouring water into her kettle. "Too long," the cowboy replied, voice rough. She brewed weak coffee and ladled stew into 2 chipped bowls. The boy woke slowly as warmth reached him. His eyes opened, bright blue like summer sky. "Thank you, miss," he whispered, polite and careful in his speech. Clara felt something soften inside her chest. The boy ate with hunger. The cowboy barely touched his food. He watched his son like a man guarding treasure. Night deepened. Snow hammered the walls. Clara added another log to the fire. She felt the cowboy's gaze follow her movements, not with threat, but with something gentler. Gratitude, maybe, and her disbelief that kindness still lived in places like this. When the boy finally slept, the cowboy stood at the window staring into the storm. They're not just lost, Clara realized. They're running. Morning came pale and gray. The storm had weakened, but still held the mountain tight. Clara rose quietly and began making biscuits from the last of her flour. She added plum jam she had been saving for Christmas. The cowboy stood and helped without being asked. He moved with ease in her small kitchen, the way a man does who has worked hard most of his life. The boy woke and looked around the cabin. "Where are we, Pa?" he asked. "Safe," the cowboy said softly. "For now." Clara noticed things as they ate. The horses outside were strong-boned and well-bred. Even tired, they held themselves proud. The boy's manners were careful, yet refined. The cowboy's coat, though worn, had been stitched with skill, not cheaply made. These were not ordinary drifters. "How far were you headed?" she asked. "Far enough," the cowboy answered. A pause stretched between them. "You can't ride today," Clara said firmly. "Your horses are spent. Your boy nearly froze." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "We could work," he said after a moment, "for our keep." Clara looked around her cabin. The barn door sagged. The fence leaned. The firewood pile was nearly gone. Since her father died, she had been fighting alone to keep the place standing. "3 days," she said. "3 days," he agreed. The boy smiled for the first time. "I'm Tommy," he said brightly. "This is my pa." "Nathaniel," the cowboy added quietly. "Clara," she replied. They shook hands across her rough wooden table, and his grip was calloused but careful. She felt the warmth of it long after he let go. That afternoon, Nathaniel split wood with steady rhythm. Each swing of the axe echoed across the ridge. Clara stood at the window, listening to that sound, a sound she had not heard since her father's axe had fallen silent. Tommy gathered eggs from the coop, laughing when one hen chased him. His laughter filled her yard like sunlight, breaking through clouds. That evening, as the sky cleared and stars appeared sharp and bright, Clara felt something she had not felt in years. Her home no longer felt empty. But as she watched Nathaniel from across the firelight, she saw the weight in his eyes, the way he studied the horizon whenever he thought she was not looking. They were not just travelers caught in a storm. They were hiding from something, and Clara had just opened her door to it. The third morning dawned clear and sharp, the storm finally broken. Snow covered the ridge in thick white layers that sparkled under the rising sun. Smoke curled from Clara's chimney in a thin gray line. For the first time in days, the valley below was visible. The trail down the mountain could be traveled now. Clara stood at the stove stirring oats, her chest tight with a feeling she did not want to name. Outside, she heard Nathaniel saddling the horses. Tommy's small voice carried across the yard. "Pa, do we have to go?" Clara closed her eyes. "Yes, son," Nathaniel answered gently. "We can't stay where we ain't invited." The words cut deeper than they should have. Clara stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tighter. The cold bit her cheeks, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. Nathaniel worked quietly, tightening straps, checking hooves. He did not look at her. Tommy sat on the porch steps, shoulders slumped. "You're leaving," Clara said softly. "Trails are clear," Nathaniel replied. "We've taken enough of your kindness." "You haven't." "We have." His voice was steady, but she could hear the struggle beneath it. Tommy looked up at her, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Miss Clara, can't we stay just one more day?" Clara swallowed hard. Nathaniel stepped closer to his horse and ran a hand along its leg. "The shoe," Clara said suddenly. "One of them's loose." Nathaniel frowned and crouched down. The shoe was fine, but from where he stood, he could not see clearly. "Must have missed it," he muttered. "Better rest him another day," Clara said quickly. "Can't risk laming him." Their eyes met. He knew she was lying. She knew he knew. But after a long second, he nodded. "One more day," he said. Tommy let out a small cheer and threw his arms around Clara's waist. She laughed despite the tears burning behind her eyes. That day felt different. They worked side by side in the kitchen. Clara showed Tommy how to mix soap from ash and lye. Nathaniel built a small woodshed beside the cabin, strong and square. His hands moved with purpose, as if building something lasting instead of something temporary. Evening fell golden and quiet. After supper, they stood outside beneath a sky so clear it felt close enough to touch. The Milky Way stretched above them like a river of light. "I should tell you something," Nathaniel said low. Clara's heart skipped. "Not tonight," she answered softly. When you're ready." He looked at her with surprise, then something warmer. Inside, Tommy called out from a bad dream. Nathaniel went to him quickly, his voice gentle as he calmed the boy. Clara remained on the porch, staring at the stars. She was falling for them, both of them, and she still did not know who they truly were. The next afternoon, riders appeared at the bottom of the ridge. 3 men. They rode hard and fast. Clara felt her stomach drop. Nathaniel saw them too. His face changed instantly. Whatever softness had been there vanished, replaced by something hard and guarded. "Get inside," he said quietly. But it was too late. The riders reached the yard in a storm of snow and dirt. The one in front sat tall in his saddle, dressed in fine wool and polished boots. But his face carried the easy arrogance of a man who had never struggled a day in his life. "Afternoon, Clara," he called with a sharp smile. "Heard you got company." Clara stepped forward. "You can leave, Lucas." Lucas ignored her. His gaze slid to Nathaniel standing in the doorway, Tommy half hidden behind him. "Well now," Lucas said. "Who's this?" Nathaniel did not answer. Lucas leaned forward in his saddle. "You know there's a railroad coming through this territory. Your land's right in the path. I'm authorized to make you an offer." "Not for sale," Clara replied. Lucas chuckled. "That's so. I also heard you're behind on payments. Shame if you lost everything your daddy built." Clara felt heat rise to her face. She had begged the banker for more time. She had stretched every dollar thin. How did Lucas know? But Nathaniel stepped forward slightly. The movement was small, but Lucas's horse shifted nervously. "What's your name?" Lucas asked him sharply. "Doesn't matter," Nathaniel said. Lucas's eyes narrowed. "A man who hides his name is hiding more than that." "Get off my land," Clara snapped. Lucas smirked. "Think about my offer before you lose it anyway." He turned his horse and rode off with his men, laughter trailing behind them. The yard fell silent. Clara turned to Nathaniel. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "Who are you?" He looked at her, pain clear in his eyes. "A man trying to do right," he said quietly. "That's not enough. It's all I can give." The words hung heavy between them. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the wind and to the quiet sounds of Nathaniel packing their few belongings. Before dawn, she heard Tommy crying softly. "We can't leave her, Pa," the boy pleaded. "A man respects what's asked of him," Nathaniel replied, his voice breaking. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing. When morning came, she did not go outside to watch them leave. She stood at the window and listened to hoofbeats fade down the trail. And with each step they took away from her cabin, something inside her felt like it was breaking. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Clara did not remember falling to her knees, only the sound of the door closing and the silence that followed. The cabin felt empty again. Too empty. She had survived 2 winters alone after her father passed. She had endured hunger, cold, and the kind of loneliness that made a person forget their own voice. But this felt different. This felt like she had pushed away something good because she was afraid to hold it. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Snow melted slowly from the roof, dripping steady outside her window. A knock came at the door. Clara's heart jumped. She opened it to find old Moses, her nearest neighbor from 5 miles down the ridge. He rarely visited anyone. "You sent them away," he said quietly. Clara nodded. Moses stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "You know who that man is?" She shook her head. "Nathaniel Thorne Harrison," Moses said. "Only son of the Harrison Railroad Empire. Richest family in 3 territories." Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Harrison," she whispered. Moses nodded. "His wife died last year bringing their 2nd child into the world. Baby didn't survive. Folks say he walked away from the company not long after, took the boy, and disappeared." Clara's hands trembled. "Lucas found out he was in town," Moses continued. "Plans to expose him in the square tonight. Drag him back to that life. Use him to push that railroad through, whether folks like it or not." "When?" Clara asked. "Now." She was already reaching for her coat. The ride down the mountain was wild and dangerous. Ice hid beneath fresh snow. Her mare nearly slipped twice on the narrow turns. Wind cut at her face and stole her breath, but she did not slow down. She saw Tommy's tear-streaked face in her mind, heard Nathaniel's quiet voice. "We can't leave her." The town came into view just as darkness fell. The lanterns flickered along the main street. A crowd had gathered in the square. Lucas stood on the porch of the hotel, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "There he is," Lucas announced. "Nathaniel Harrison, hiding like a common drifter." Nathaniel stood below, straight and silent. Tommy clung to his side. Clara rode straight through the crowd. People scattered as she pulled her horse to a stop in the center of the square. Every eye turned to her. She dismounted, legs shaking, but steady enough to carry her forward. "That poor girl's here to defend him?" Lucas sneered. Clara stepped between Lucas and Nathaniel. "Call me poor," she said loudly. "I gave shelter in a storm. What have you given but threats?" A murmur moved through the crowd. "He lied to you," Lucas shot back. "He fixed my fence," Clara replied. He chopped my firewood. He treated me like I mattered. If that's lying, I'll take it. Nathaniel stepped forward. I hid my name, he said firmly. But I didn't hide my work. Lucas laughed sharply. You're still behind on your banknotes, Clara. Tomorrow, that land won't be yours. Nathaniel reached into his coat and pulled out folded papers. Already settled, he said calmly. Bought her debt before I left this morning. Deeds clear. Gasps filled the square. Clara stared at him. He had paid her debt, even after she told him to leave. You can't buy decency, Lucas spat. I didn't buy it, Nathaniel answered. I found it in a cabin on a mountain. Lucas's confidence cracked. He looked around and saw no support left in the crowd. Slowly, he turned and walked away. Silence followed. Nathaniel looked at Clara. The land's yours, he said quietly. I only wanted you free. And you? She asked softly. Are you free? Before he could answer, Tommy slipped his small hands into both of theirs. Can we go home now? He asked. The word hit Clara like sunlight after winter. Home. She looked at Nathaniel. He looked back at her, uncertainty in his eyes. Yes, Clara said gently. Let's go home. Spring arrived late that year, but when it did, it came strong. Wildflowers covered the ridge in color. The snow melted into clear streams. The cabin no longer stood lonely against the sky. Nathaniel built a second room onto the house. He repaired the barn properly and fenced the garden with straight posts that would last for decades. Everywhere Clara looked, she saw proof that he was staying. Tommy's laughter echoed across the yard each morning, and he grew taller, stronger, happier. They married in early summer, a simple ceremony with Moses as witness and the mountains as their church. Clara wore her mother's dress. Tommy stood proud beside them. The cabin that once held only silence now held life. Months later, as autumn painted the ridge gold again, Clara stood at the doorway watching Nathaniel teach Tommy how to mend fence. She rested a hand over her growing belly. The baby would come in winter. A full circle from the night 3 desperate knocks had changed everything. Nathaniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her carefully. You ever regret it? She asked softly. Walking away from all that wealth? He smiled down at her. I didn't walk away from wealth, he said. I found the real kind. Tommy ran toward them, and holding a wild rose he had picked from the ridge. For the prettiest ma on the mountain, he declared proudly. Clara laughed and pulled him close. The wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Smoke rose steady from their chimney. The storm that once brought strangers to her door had given her something she never knew she needed. She had opened her home to a tired cowboy and his grieving son. And somewhere between the firewood and the fences, between truth and trust, they had stopped being strangers. They had become family. And this time, when the wind knocked against her door, Clara did not feel afraid. She felt grateful, because she knew exactly who stood inside her home, and she knew she would never be alone again.